Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Theology Talk here at Thoughtful Faith. This is a show where we explore both our own theology in the Restored Church of Jesus Christ and the theology of others. I'm your host, Jacob Hansen, and joining me today is my co-host, Hayden Carroll, and our very special guest, Daniel Constantino. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
What's up, guys?
Good to be here.
Hey, so Daniel, we'll start real quick with you. Just tell everyone a little bit about who you are and why you're here joining us today.
Sure. Well, my name's Daniel, 26 years old, live in Mesa, Arizona. I go to Apologia Church. Right now, I'm studying for my MDiv, so my Master's in Divinity at Whitfield Theological Seminary. R.C. Sproul came out of there. A couple of big names came out of there. So I'm studying there, but I'm a guy who loves theology. One day I want to be a pastor, so I'm pursuing eldership, but I'm a guy who loves God and loves theology.
Awesome. Well, and also just so everyone knows, Daniel and his good friend Oscar, they did a debate with Hayden and I. And I one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this with you today was also kind of to show people that, like, look, just because you like have a debate with people and stuff, like, doesn't mean that you aren't friends at the end of the day. I mean, Hayden, you and Daniel have still been talking quite a bit, as I understand.
Oh yeah. I'd say dozens and dozens of hours of voice messages back and forth.
Nice. Yeah. The debate continues. But no, I think I think this is a good. I mean, our differences are real and they matter, but also I think it's good when people dialogue and interact with each other. I think it's a good thing. So, all righty, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about really. So there's a big fancy term. We could say we're talking about presuppositional apologetics, which is the big fancy word for it. But I want to approach it from a more sort of approachable point of view. And that is really, and I want to talk about some of our differences when it comes to this sort of presuppositional apologetics. But I want to focus first on just the way that I think that this sort of way of reasoning, how it interacts with atheism. Because frankly, I think I have found that when dealing with atheists and those who are non-believers, that this is a very powerful, there's a lot of powerful things that you can get out of understanding this sort of methodology of argument and things like that. So I want to start off though, by saying that the reason I got into this at all was because after our debate, Daniel, or actually no, before our debate, Daniel gave me a gift. Daniel, you wanna hold up what you gave me?
Yeah, this book right here.
Yeah, so it's called The Impossibility of the Contrary by Greg Bahnsen. I'd never read it before, and it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it, and I ended up watching some of Greg Bahnsen's videos and lectures and things, and I found it very interesting and compelling. And we'll talk about the areas of difference maybe in our second half of this conversation. But he had a lot of interesting things to say. And so what I wanted to do is review together some of this stuff and basically go through it and explore what it has to offer and what I really got out of it that I thought was interesting. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So before we get started though, if you were to kind of want to briefly summarize what presuppositional apologetics are, Daniel, what would you say?
Briefly, huh?
Yeah, it's probably hard to kind of briefly sum up.
It's a biblical apologetic. I'm just kidding. No, it's I would say it's probably it is the most biblical and rigorous way of defending what we believe is the Orthodox Christian faith. What it does is it changes your thinking, like you kind of brought up already, in terms of everybody presupposes something. Everybody comes to the conversation with a worldview. They already view the world in a certain way. They have beliefs about origins, about purpose, if there is purpose, and all these different areas. And so presuppositional apologetics says, okay, let's attack the foundation and let's do it biblically. And so let's start with God as our reference point, his revealed word, and let's actually combat, let's have a reasoned defense with atheism, Islam, Latter-day Saints, so on and so forth, Hinduism, But that's I think a brief way of describing it.
Yeah, that's good. And I would say, just for everyone who's listening, if you're not familiar with the term apologetics or it doesn't mean we're making apologies. It's basically your way of defending the faith. And what I really liked about Bonson is he basically says, look, the best defense is a good offense. You don't. And so what I want to do is I actually want to start with a clip from Greg Bonson talking about kind of a different way of approaching these sorts of questions and issues. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to play this video, and then if you guys want to mute your mics, and then we'll talk about it when he gets done here.
Deal with every false religion out there, every cult and so forth. It's just not possible. There's really two different ways to approach apologetics. I want you to think of yourself as being in a room with a man that has a revolver. You have no weapon to use against him, okay? And he's got all these bullets in his gun, and he's getting ready to shoot you, and there's no exit. Now, as I see it, there are two things you can do. Or if you knew you were going to be put into this room, there are two ways you could prepare. One way to prepare to deal with all of those bullets that are going to be shot at you is to practice dodging bullets. Really work on all the maneuvers, back and forth, up and down, and so forth. And so you say, I hope.
I'm just going to pause real quick right there, because I think he makes an interesting point there. So try and dodge the bullets from the people that are critiquing you and attacking you. Hayden, do you see that at all in the church, where people spend their time trying to sort of dodge and you're muted right now, I think, Hayden, but people try and dodge the bullets?
All the time. And you know why? It's because they don't have anything else to do. Most of the time, they don't know what they believe, or they don't know why they believe it. So they have no offense. So all they do is they have to dodge. And it's interesting because, like, I'm sure most of the people who are watching this are going to be LDS. If you go to the Easter pageant, or you go to the to General Conference, you will see Daniel and others from Apologia Church or from other churches, and they have arguments. And you'll find lots of Latter-day Saints who don't know how to handle those arguments because they don't really know what they believe. So they feel really uncomfortable about it because they're dodging the entire time, and they don't really know the arguments, and they don't know what they believe well enough
so
to push back. Really,
and Daniel, do you find that within your Christian community that they also sometimes act like bullet dodgers?
I think in the broader evangelical term, yeah, but it's because one of the benefits of Bonson and Van Til is changing your way of thinking. So we've been able to receive the benefit from these men in terms of, the Bible doesn't constantly tell us to only dodge, although the Bible does tell us to give a defense. I think there is a proper time to receive those attacks and defend them, but the Bible also talks about the believer engaging with other person's position. I think what Bonson is going to say next, I think he's going to say is take away their gun, right?
Let's listen to what Bonson has to say on that. So let's mute our mics again.
That even though this guy's got 6 or 8 bullets in his gun, that I can just jump around and miss, he just won't hit me any of those times. Or another way would be to practice disarming your opponent so that he is not able to shoot anymore. Now, of those two, which do you think would be the more practical way to approach apologetics? If we have any bullet dodgers out there in the audience, this week's going to disappoint you. Though I'm going to be dodging some bullets, dealing with specific arguments, what I want you to learn is how to get the gun out of the other guy's hand.
And I think that kind of sums it up. What Bonson is doing is he's saying that there is a way to respond to people that are attacking your faith that isn't just to dodge the things that they're saying, but to actually disarm them, to take the teeth, the gun out of their hand, to take the teeth out of their arguments. And I think that is what he's really good at. And so what I wanted to do was explore some of the ways in that book that you gave me, Daniel, that he talks about doing that. So any other comments before we go to that?
No, I'm ready.
Okay, let's jump right into it then. So he talks about 4 different areas. When someone makes an argument or an attack on you, generally they're going to make an argument, right? Some sort of an argument as to why the Christian faith isn't true or whatever. And he has these 4 questions about their argument that you need to assess. You need to ask this question. What does their argument presuppose? Number 1. Is this arbitrary? Is this inconsistent in some way? And what are the consequences of this particular argument? And what I want to do for the remainder of the time we have here is to explore each one of these in kind. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about what does their argument presuppose. So Daniel, tell me a little bit about sort of that first question. You know, why is that useful to ask the question? You know, what does their argument presuppose?
Sure. Well, what happens oftentimes is you're either dealing with evidences or you're dealing with an argument. Maybe somebody's throwing something at you. Hey, deal with this, right? Here's a critique for your faith. And what Bonson gets at is before they even get there, before they can account for having this critique or this problem or this question, they have to start at the beginning. And if at the beginning they don't have their gun or they don't have a foundation, they can't even get to the position where they ask you this sort of thing. So again, it's kind of just being aware that everybody presupposes something. Everybody has a worldview. They view the world in a certain way. And what Bonson will push them to, and this is the latter one, is if they're consistent with it, it either falls apart or they have to abandon what they actually believe.
So, and I want to specifically talk about this in terms of atheists and the way atheists will attack you on the level of morality. Mm-hmm. So they will say something like, it was wrong for X thing to occur, right? Like some church practice or doctrine, and they will go and say, this was morally wrong. So sure. Daniel, what do you say to a non-believer who comes to you and says, hey, I think that what your church is doing is immoral? You know what I mean? Like it is wrong to not let gay people get married, for instance.
If you don't mind, let me use I think an even more real and relevant example. What happened in Texas? I think about a month, 2 months ago, the shooting. We would all, and even atheists, we would all look at that and say that's wrong. It's horrible, and we would all have all types of gross feelings towards the man who did that, and everything that surrounds it. But when the atheist comes to me, and I've heard this, where was your God in Texas? Your God is evil because he didn't stop it. And so now they want to make a morality claim on God, that God is evil, that he's unjust. Our question to them is, how do you get evil, a concept of evil, in a universe that is actually like you profess it is? So if everything is just time and chance acting on matter, it's just random. There is no personal governance over the universe. Where do you get the idea that something is evil, and who gets to decide it? Because evil is an abstract concept. It's not something that they can physically touch. An atheist will love to say, if I can touch it, taste it, feel it, smell it, I believe it, but I can't touch or see your God, so I don't believe him. Mm-hmm. And I ask them, well, have you ever seen the evil? Have you ever seen evil itself? And they'll say, well, no. And then it's okay, well, who gets to decide evil? What if the shooter thought what he was doing was right? Why should you impose your morality instead of him imposing his? And so it gets to the question of, why are you trying to impose or presuppose that there is such a thing as evil? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
In basic worldview.
And there's an idea of, there has to be some sort of an objective moral standard, right? Yeah. Because for them to be able to, they presuppose within their statement that was wrong. There's a presupposition in there that there's such a thing as wrong, and that it's wrong always, forever, with whatever it is. And so what I do is, one of the ways that I have a little slide about this that I'll put here on the screen real quick. And that is this idea of, so this is the basic argument. If X depends on Y, but Y does not exist, then X does not exist. So to use this example of morality, if there is no X, morality at all, if you can't show and give a basis for your moral claims, then your statement that it was wrong, it depends on there being a moral claim. So at the end of the day, their argument falls apart because they don't have the presuppositional ground to stand on.
Yeah.
They've cut off the branch that they are sitting on, essentially. It's a self-defeating thing, right?
Yeah.
Did I get Hayden, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's try to steel man them really quick. What's their response, Daniel, typically when you make that argument? And what's the strongest version of that?
I think most atheists haven't thought about it at all because most people don't think about the presuppositions. We take things for granted. Christians, Muslims, this is something as human beings we do. So most atheists haven't thought about it. And I would say probably 9 out of 10 times they dig their heels in the ground and they say, you know what? There is nothing wrong with rape. For me, they'll say, for me it is, but I cannot say that rape is always wrong. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard them say that. And usually we'll be out in the street when we're doing this, and I'll be with an atheist and I'll say, okay, look, you're going to tell me that murder, because then they'll say, well, murder's not wrong. I'll say, okay, if somebody comes up to your friend, because they're usually with friends, if someone comes up to your friend right now and shoots him with a gun in the head and kills him, you're going to respond like there is in fact something wrong with murder. You're going to want the person locked up, pressing charges. You're going to respond as if something bad just happened. So although with one side of your mouth, to stay consistent in front of me right now, you'll say there's nothing wrong with murder, but you can't live consistent with that, because the moment it does happen, this is what we would say, the image of God is crying out to you that this is wrong, and so you're going to respond in such a way where it's where it's wrong. Now sometimes, I said 9 out of 10, sometimes they'll try to dig a way around and say, you know what, society determines morality. It's a societal convention. But the problem with that is, well, what happened in America when we decided as a society it was okay to enslave black people?
Or when Hitler
was it
decided
right or wrong then? So it's fair to say that, because I would flip it the other way. I feel like 9 out of 10 times they do turn to the societal argument, or we get to decide, or the group gets to decide. And then the one time, because I don't think I've ever heard anyone say rape is okay. I never have anyway.
Well, let's go back to Bonson on this. Yeah. So society gets to decide. Is that arbitrary? The whim of society is just arbitrary, right?
Well,
why do I have to care what the arbitrary society says?
well, it's two-sided of arbitrary. It's arbitrary that they get to decide, and it's arbitrary what they choose, right? So
yeah, it's all arbitrary. Here's the thing. Actually, Hayden, you want to know what the best actual steel man I've seen of it is? People like Friedrich Nietzsche, who actually admit, there's no such thing as morality.
Right.
It's all power.
Yeah. And I was going to say, 1 out of 10 times I find a person who says, there is none. You can't justify it. But
see, that's the thing and to be honest, I actually admire those atheists. I call those the serious atheists, because they're actually willing to confront that in their worldview, it means everything is just power and preference. There's no right or wrong. It's just what you want, and then can you get it? Power is can you get it, and preference is what I want.
Yeah. I think it was Richard Dawkins. He said, there is no good, there is no evil. There's only blind and pitiless indifference. Stuff just happens. And
that is the logical conclusion of it. Now to get back to real quick to these what Bonson said, let me pull this up again. He talks about these are things we should look for that they presuppose in their arguments. They presuppose that there are laws of logic. They presuppose that there is uniformity in nature. They presuppose what we just brought up. They presuppose an objective moral standard that everyone is supposed to, and they'll use language like you should or should not, or it's wrong to do that, as if there was an actual standard by which we could say that not only that some things are wrong, but that people are obligated to do what's right. Right? The basic reliability of our senses, the basic reliability of our memory, personal dignity and freedom. You know what I mean? Like, let's real quick. We can't touch on every single one, but Daniel, maybe just if you want to just touch for a minute on why is it, is there a way a person can have personal dignity and freedom and be entitled to personal dignity and freedom in a world without God?
No. Well, because again, it's going to come back to their belief or their doctrine on creation. Like, how do you believe all this started, right? The origin of the universe. If you believe that all we are is the result of an explosion, right? There's some cosmic explosion that there was nothing, and then somehow something came. There was this bang, and now we're here, right? Well, in essence, what's the difference between us and a fish, or us and a bird, or us and a rock? We're all the same result of a cosmic explosion. Maybe
well, they might say something like, but we can feel more, or we're more intelligent. What do you respond to that?
I would say, who cares?
Well, but when I've heard people, I was gonna say, go ahead, you got it.
Well, I was just gonna say, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go.
You go, Hayden. Hayden, you're up, Hayden.
When you talk about animals, and one of the arguments that I bring up is when people say it's wrong to murder, because I've had atheists online mostly say that murder is wrong, and if I say why, even though I agree, they say it just is. And I say, well, why? And you keep pushing them, and they basically get frustrated, and they say, well, if you don't think murder is wrong or killing innocent people is wrong, then you're a bad person, which is another judgment call. The example I give is, okay, is it wrong for a lion to kill another lion? Or is it immoral for a lion to kill a lion? They'll say, well, no. And I'll say, well, do you believe that we're any different in our value? Maybe, because a lot of people nowadays would say that we're no more valuable than the animals.
But right? And I want to go to this next question because I think it answers exactly what you're saying, Hayden. And it's the way to, and this is, I think, the biggest thing. The presupposing thing is important, but here was the one that you see it everywhere. Once you understand this concept of arbitrariness, you will see this everywhere. They'll say, well, it's just wrong. That's arbitrary. That's just a mere opinion, right? And you see it everywhere. People society decided that it's right. Then it's right. Okay.
But like you said, like slavery, right? Was it right then? It's like
anything that they say is going to be arbitrary unless they can reference some sort of a standard that acts as the basis for those statements, right?
Now, other than themselves.
Now, Daniel, what are your thoughts on this idea of arbitrariness and maybe examples of it, or what are your thoughts on the nature of arbitrary arguments and where you see them?
Well, from our position, any worldview that's not what we say the Christian worldview is going to fall into one of two categories in terms of it's going to be inconsistent somewhere, or it's going to be arbitrary because it doesn't have the reference point that we would say is the triune God. So when it comes to being arbitrary, some people don't have a problem with it. Verbally, they'll say, yeah, I can decide. Yeah, you should listen to me. And especially with everything going on with Roe versus Wade, women will say, no, you're a man. You can't speak on this issue because I said so. And that's fine. Yeah, just because I'm a woman. So it doesn't carry, the thing is, it doesn't carry a lot of weight because where they're willing to make that judgment call in one area of life, they're not willing to live that way consistently. And that's the problem, is that you're just arbitrary. Because what happens when I come along and I say, you know what? No, as a man, I can make every law for your body. And it's just arbitrary. There's literally no weight to it. And of course, they don't live that way. No one lives that way. No one lives arbitrarily.
I have a solution for that. In 2022, you could be a woman if you wanted to be.
Yeah.
So.
It is arbitrary. But see, here's what's crazy, guys. Here's what's really wild. When you so one of the big philosophers that has had an enormous impact on the modern culture is Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault is a postmodernist. The postmodernists acknowledge this fact that everything is arbitrary and that it's all ultimately nothing but power and preference. This is why I actually have a lot of respect intellectually for what I call serious atheists, like Michel Foucault. Because what Michel Foucault, basically his big argument was that the world is essentially nothing but power dynamics. We use these linguistic things. We make up these social customs. And all it is it's groups of people exercising they have their preferences, and then they set up structures and language and institutions in order to get what they want, right? And it's all ultimately arbitrary. There is no, let's call it a meta narrative or a religious narrative or a God or anything like that. We are just arbitrary matter in motion, essentially. And they actually take it to its logical conclusion. And so, but like Daniel is pointing out, no one lives that way. And not only that, if we did live that way, the whole world would like fall apart. It would be hell. It would be hell. I mean, quite literally, we would descend into chaos. And so this is where I see, again, these arguments from Bahnsen, that you can see how no one behaves this way, and we wouldn't even want the world to be this way. And I don't know, there's more to it, obviously, but I just think that it's worth recognizing when it comes to arbitrariness, that's basically what arbitrary means, and some people will embrace that.
Another thing I'll bring up to atheists is I'll say, because being arbitrary, all it is saying just because it works for me, or just because I want to, or whatever. And I tell an atheist, okay, if you ask me, why do I believe Jesus rose from the dead? And I say, just because, would you accept that as an answer? And they would say, no. Yeah. It's okay. So why should I accept that as an answer from you? If you want to accept just because from me, why should I accept it from you? And so, of course, this is where we like to point out that the atheist actually borrows a lot of capital from the Christian worldview. That they believe
that's you taking the gun away from them.
Yeah. And so
and Hayden, you have a book. He just said they steal a lot of stuff from the Christian worldview. Another book you all should read. Check it out.
Frank Turek, Stealing from God.
I didn't even think about that.
Really good.
It's basically, that's basically the whole premise of his book. His book is essentially shows that all of these things that the atheist goes and essentially presupposes, you know what I mean? Like morality and personal dignity and freedom and uniformity in nature, but they don't have an explanation for why they
deny the reason for them, which is an existence of a higher power, right? It's a self-defeating argument.
Which in the way I see it is yes, the best explanation for these things is a higher power, is God, now Daniel and I, we're going to talk about this in the next episode, where he will continue to argue that not only is it any God, but it is specifically the triune God of Christianity, and specifically according to sort of the doctrines of a particular brand of Christianity, let's say. But we'll talk about that in a later episode. But the whole point here, though, is that at least we have something to try and base this out of, right? Yeah. Where they're for them, it is totally arbitrary. It's their mere opinion. And it shows up in things like relativism. So Daniel, do you want to, would you be willing to comment real quick on relativism and how that is a form of arbitrariness?
Yeah, well, it's like Bahnsen says it this way. He says fire burns in Africa the same way it does in America. But when people say that morals change from Africa to America, he says, why? Right? If fire is constant, it's the same, it burns, it does the same things. When you say relativism, that things can change depending where you're at, who you're around, your circumstance. The question is why, and why aren't those binding the same way we would have to say the laws of logic are binding everywhere? Everywhere you go, you're gonna be stuck with gravity, right? And so when it comes to morality, not even morality, but other areas, we would say to take a relative approach is to say it's actually be self-defeating, because then you can account for what is true, you can account for what is right. It's just your mere opinion. And in a world where it's just your mere opinion, that's why I give the answer, who cares? So what, you feel this way. What if the man feels like when he goes into your car and he steals your radio, he thinks that's a good thing? He wants it. It makes him happy. It pleases him. Now to you, you're like, I worked hard for that radio. He broke into my car. He owes me something. But if the judge sat on the judge's seat and was arbitrary and said, oh, well, no one would be happy with that. So to be relative is just to say it kind of depends who you are, different strokes for different folks. And of course, that doesn't work.
One of the most effective questions that I found to ask somebody who says, everybody gets to decide for themselves what's right and wrong, right? That's a pretty common idea nowadays. Everyone gets to decide for themselves. The question you got to ask is, do you believe that people should impose their morals on other people? And the answer most of the time is no. You should not be imposing your morals on anybody. And then you go to, okay, well, what if I wanted to, kill your child? Or what if I wanted to kill my own child? Would you try to stop me? And if they're a decent human being, which most people are, they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, well, why are you trying to impose your morals upon me? Or what if my child agreed? What if we both agreed? What if it was a consensual sacrifice? Would you try to stop us? Most people would still say yes. And my question is, why are you trying to impose your morals on me? And then it just goes around in circles. And anyway.
Yeah, and it ultimately is arbitrary, because the way that you divide up the lines within relativism is arbitrary. The way you decide if this person's worldview is okay or not, it just totally falls apart. Now, prejudicial conjecture, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he talks about that as when they say that it just seems so. It's like it just seems that way. It's kind of another form of a mere opinion. Or maybe that's unargued philosophical bias. I can't remember exactly. Do you remember those two? Are those ringing bells for you, Daniel? I can't remember what those were exactly.
Prejudicial conjecture is what you were saying in terms of it just seems to be that way. And of course, I know we'll get into this later, but part of the punch to this apologetic is you're God's creature living in God's universe, and you're trying to deny your creator. This is why you have to come up with arbitrary standards. This is why you have to look around and say, well, it just seems to be this way, so I'm going to buy it. But the problem with that is if you live in a universe where at one point there was actually nothing, right? Whatever that is, there was nothing. And then something came into being, and then these atoms were fusing, whatever happened, and there was this bang. Okay, that is chaos. That is random. How do you know that won't happen again? Right? How come the atheist doesn't, when he's sitting down in his chair, how come he doesn't assume that he's just going to float up into the ceiling? Well, because he's presupposing that gravity is going to hold him down. But in a world,
the uniformity of nature.
Yeah, but in a world where everything is just chaos, where stuff is just random, where there was nothing and then there was something, how do you know that won't happen again? How do you know the whole world won't just explode?
So let me see if I can kind of get to that, because what you're saying, it sounds like, is that the universe is orderly. Like, yes, that is a fact. And the thing is that if it is organized in some way, if there's an orderly nature to reality, what is the best explanation for that organization? And the organization but it doesn't only just seem to be organized in the physical material. It also seems to be organized in the terms of maybe what we would call the spiritual order of things, or the psychological order of things, or however somebody wants to put it. The reality is that they're on a metaphysical level, kind of underneath the physical. There also seems to be laws. Like if you treat someone like crap, they will react a certain way. You know what I mean? And so in my mind, it's like the levels of order within the universe are just like on every level, both on the level of conscious experience to the level of physical manifestation. And again, they don't have any explanation that can sufficiently, I believe, account for a universe that's orderly, even within their theories of evolution and other things like that. Even if those were, true, it still would not. Evolution, all it can really show is that there is a, species change over time within living organisms. No one knows how those organisms came to be. No one knows the laws, again, to presuppose, because you have to presuppose organized laws of the universe in order to even get atoms. in the first place.
Yeah.
Like there's all these levels of sort of order that it's sort of like we live in the most complex, incredibly intricate thing ever. And people act like, then they just say, well, it all just happened. And it's just, that just seems, again, arbitrary.
They take it for granted. They take it for granted. And part of this apologetic that Bonson will point out is show them where they're standing, show them their feet. So while they have one foot in atheism and they want to say that this universe is random, that everything is chaos, they have a foot in the Christian worldview by now claiming morality, value to human life, laws of logic, uniformity in nature, all these things. They have one foot in and one foot out. And so from the Christian perspective, what we do is we point at their feet and we say, look where you're standing. Right now, you're assuming human value. I can say that because I can say everybody's made in the image of God. This is why you should protect this little girl. This is why you should protect this human being, because they're made in the image of God and they're deserving of value and respect. You think our ancestors were fish, that were African apes. So what? Right? And then to go even deeper, they say essentially all we are is stardust. We're stardust. And if we're just stardust, who cares what stardust does stardust? It doesn't matter.
Yep. And not only that, you have to presuppose then that if you're just stardust just operates according to the laws of nature. You're nothing more than I've heard this analogy. You're nothing more than a Coke can fizzing.
Yeah.
You're just a chemical reaction playing itself out.
Yeah.
And not only that, it would seem really odd that you would go and throw someone in jail for just doing what the laws of nature caused them to do. Yeah. According to the way that the matter in motion was happening. There's no moral accountability. And so any sort of moral accountability, systems of justice, I mean, the levels to which when you dig into the presuppositions, you end up realizing like, holy cow, they're literally standing on air. And Hayden, you and I as Latter-day Saints might have a good analogy about a building without a foundation.
Absolutely. Now, lest we enter into an echo chamber and continue to beat up the weakest arguments of atheism, because we would all agree that those are pretty weak arguments, and those may be the strongest of those 9 out of 10 people. But what about you call them the serious atheists? Well, what's the conversations you start to have with them?
So
because the rest of them, you get to this point where you can't really go anywhere. But with these individuals,
so there's two forms of atheism that I think are the most serious, and I would say. And one of them isn't actually that serious because I think it falls apart. The most serious atheism is like Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay. He just recognizes this and says, yeah, it's all arbitrary. It's all just power and it is what it is. And the thing is that no one like lives that way, but at least he has a consistent argument. You know what I mean? Like it is consistent, like rationally, even if you don't live that way, which you can say, well, there's an inconsistency if you don't live like, do you really believe it if you don't?
Yeah. People believe how they act, right?
Yes. Now, on the other hand, there is the argument that can be made. The Sam Harris is probably the most popular, the popularizer of the atheistic objective, trying to provide an objective basis to morality. And Daniel, I want you to kind of respond to this, but I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here because I'm actually a big fan of Sam's work. And I think he actually he gets the closest. Okay. He says that when we talk about good and bad, right? Like those are linguistic concepts that we're using, right? We're describing something. What are we describing? His thing is what is being described is the well-being of a conscious creature. So we say that if something increases something's well-being, the well-being of a conscious creature, that we use the word good. That's what we mean by it. And if we say something is bad in the degree to which it is the conscious creature is suffering. So I put it this way. If you have a spectrum, if suffering is in one direction, and then in the other direction is, let's call it well-being. Let's just call it the opposite of suffering, like going the other way. Prospering, thriving, whatever you want to do. And we say our morality is a description of the way certain behaviors affect either movement toward suffering or movement toward well-being. And he says that is what we are describing when we use this language.
Yeah, I would say first, why well-being? Why not suffering? Why not hurt people? Why not live in a world where you can, by your power and dominance, take advantage of people? Why not?
So his thing is, now I think you're hitting it where I think he's blind. But what I would say is that, yes, that is what the moral language describes, but you're right. His morality falls short because in that objective world, he's talking about well-being in the abstract, where you experience well-being. And so the good for you is your well-being, right?
Yeah.
That's what the language is actually describing, is your well-being. Now, watching your children, for instance, prosper might bring you well-being. But you know what else? Enslaving my neighbor might bring me well-being, might make me happier.
What's good for you might be bad for someone else. So how do you deal with that contradiction?
Exactly. So where I actually think that a Christian worldview actually solves the problem, because I think he's right. I actually do believe that what moral language describes is good, is the nature of well-being, is the nature of something's relationship to suffering. Okay. And what we call good is that which leads us away from suffering. Even, and Daniel, you might disagree with this. This is where I think we may have a little bit of a disconnect here, but would I call God good if he did nothing but, if he caused me endless misery and suffering eternally? Would he be good, or would he be the devil? I call God good because God can provide, it can save me from suffering. If God was literally he just made me suffer and made me suffer forever and made everyone suffer forever, why would we ever use the word good to describe God? Right? The reason we use the word good or bad in a moral sense is to describe something relationship to suffering, and because we believe that God provides us with the ability to have actual joy and happiness. That's why we call him good.
Sure. Yeah. So someone being suffocated by another human being and basically tortured, most people would say it's a bad thing. But when we look at the instance of the cross, I say that's a good thing.
But it's only a good thing because it wouldn't have been a good thing if it was just he died on the cross and that was it, and
Sure.
No one was saved. And not only that, his dying on the cross meant that we're all going to die on crosses and suffer eternally the same fate as Jesus.
Well,
I wouldn't call that a good thing, right? So all I'm saying is the language that's being used there is this, but here's what's crazy. You and I know that there's an ultimate justice, and that our well-being, we will suffer if we harm our fellow man and break God's laws and do terrible things, that suffering will result from that. And so it's sort of like you can, in an atheist world, you actually can get away with it,
Sure.
right? In our world, you can never get away with it. And what do we mean by that, to get away with it? We mean that your well-being is connected with everyone else's. And if you do wrong by others or by God, that your well-being will be affected. And so watch out, because you can't get away with anything.
Sure. Well,
and that becomes the basis of a moral system that we say, don't do these bad things. And here's why you shouldn't do them, is because if you do, you will suffer. And we all assume that people don't want to suffer.
To harm others is to harm yourself in a Christian world.
Bingo. And in the atheist world, not always. They'll try and say like, yeah, but it's sort of like, no, dude, they have to make the assumption that you never can get away with anything in the world. And that's just not the case.
Right.
Like you can get away with stuff. Like people did get away with stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's why atheists always try to bring what we would say is they try to bring God's justice into the now, because they don't believe, from our perspective, you can't escape it, because you have to answer for it someday when you see God, from our perspective. So the atheists, they try to bring the cosmic justice into the now and say, if someone's done wrong, we need to like give them our justice now at the expense of maybe we would say actually doing harm, right? So as soon as they think somebody did something wrong in their head, I don't want to let this person get away with it and live their life and not pay for it. So I'm going to make them pay for it. And they may be wrong, or they may not have enough evidence to actually prove the person was guilty of whatever it was.
Which this is a great segue into our next point, which is it consistent? Because here's the problem. If we are all determined by nature, then it's totally inconsistent to then demand justice, because justice is a concept that doesn't exist in material in motion.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. In Frank Turk's book, he talks about a debate between Bahnsen and Stein, Gordon Stein, Greg Bahnsen, Gordon Stein.
You should go watch it.
I need to. And he gives the dialogue here. And basically, long story short, Bahnsen is asking Stein, who's an atheist, if he believes in the laws of logic. And he says yes. So would the typical atheist or the common atheist say that they believe in the laws of logic?
Yeah.
And so where do they say those come from?
That's the problem is from an atheistic perspective, where they don't believe in immaterial things. All we believe is what's material, what's in front of me, what can I touch,
the laws of logic aren't material. So how can they say they exist? That's my how do they respond?
So I would let me try and steelman it the best that I can. Okay. Yeah. If I'm going to play devil's advocate, they would say the laws of logic are merely our description of the regularities in nature. Okay. So we know if we have two things and then we have two more things, we have four things. And that is a description about the nature of the natural world that we observe. The way that we see the orderliness of nature itself that's what like logic describes the nature of that order.
So are you saying the laws of logic are man-made?
If I were an atheist, I would say yes, they're a social construct. They're a linguistic construct that we have created to account for the orderliness of cause and effect relationships in the cosmos.
So keep playing this with me. So as an atheist, would you say that logic existed before humans, or did it not exist?
It depends what you mean by logic. Logic.
To say truth, even.
Well, I would say, they would say what logic is it's a linguistic thing. It's language. We've made up words like 2 + 2 = 4, right? And what is that really describing? It's describing a regularity in nature. It's describing a cause and effect relationship between things. That's, I think, how they would argue it. They wouldn't see it. And I don't know that I necessarily disagree with this, by the way. I think that they may have there's a level of truth to it. I don't necessarily see the laws of logic as an abstract sort of object as much as a description of the nature of reality itself. But I also say that that's where I think you go and you say the nature of reality itself is phenomenally organized and phenomenally like law-like, and that needs explaining. And I don't think you get like from chaos or from nothingness, which are basically your two options in the eternal sort of scheme of where everything came from. It's sort of like to say that there's these regularities that hold true always. There's a lot of problems with that philosophically.
So kind of my final question on this is, would an atheist say that logic is strictly tied to truth? Right? Because you can't make sense of something that is untrue.
Yeah, so they would say, here's again, I'll play the give the devil his due. I would say, if I were an atheist, I would say truth is just a word that we use to describe the nature of reality. And
okay,
logic,
I would agree. I would agree with that. Truth is what is real.
Yeah,
right?
And logic is a tool that we use to describe the nature of reality and the way that things within reality interact with one another.
Okay, fair
right?
enough.
So it's a linguistic thing is what I think they would say. And I think that there's some power to that argument.
Daniel, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, well, I think obviously we're human beings, so we use language, but what we'd say is apart from it describing what maybe you see in reality, there is such a thing as truth outside of yourself. So before you existed, there was truth and there will be truth. Before God created Adam, truth already existed. That's where usually the atheists won't concede. They'll say, no, well, it has to be us deciding that this is what we believe true is, or this is what we believe logic is. This is logical because from our perspective, from our experience, this has been the case. But again, in a universe where stuff is random and chaos, you should be living as if anything can happen at any moment. And they assume a lot of these principles and things that they want to use that they can't account for. So even the whole idea of logic, right? You can't see it, you can't touch it. What happens if a society one day, if there's a society of 10 people on an island and they decide it's completely logical to contradict yourself? Would that then be logical? If they all agree, there's 10 of them and they say, yeah, you can contradict yourself, and that's
right.
completely
It doesn't
logical.
matter what people think or say. Truth is truth.
Yeah.
So
And there becomes an object. Well, I think there's something to be said that there becomes an objectivity to truth. Truth is that which is real, which actually exists. And even if you are an atheist, one of the problems is that everything then doesn't become arbitrary. Because if you live in an orderly universe, that means everything is acting according to these laws of logic and reason and whatnot. And it actually ends up, again, there are these, and I'm gonna go to the slide here. There are these logical fallacies within their arguments. That there are inconsistencies when you actually play it all the way out. And we've talked about things like behavioral inconsistencies, for instance, like people don't act this way. And you have to really question if a person really believes something if they don't act in accordance with that belief. Sure. And so anyway, there's a lot that I could say about this, but real quick, just as we go into the inconsistency part of it, is it inconsistent or is it consistent? Their argument. Daniel, in what ways are people inconsistent? Can you think of any good examples or
atheists?
Yeah, let's talk about atheists, for example.
Yeah. Well, part of their inconsistency, usually it can fall to morality, but we've been doing that for a while. We can take things like the idea of actual, okay, so the what is it, the James Webb telescope put out that picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they put out that picture on my Facebook, like 5 or 6 people posted that picture like all in a row. Everybody was sharing it.
I was one of those people.
You were one of them. And an atheist posted it, and he said whenever I start to get self-centered, pictures like this remind me I'm just stardust. And that was what he said. And the whole point is, okay, you don't live like you're just stardust though. And if you have a sister and you love your sister, you don't treat her like she's stardust. So while you're making claims about what you are, maybe ontologically or whatever it is that you believe about yourself, you'll say, because you want to take these claims that you came from dust, and so this is what you are, you've mutated. You'll take the origin that atheists present of the universe. This is the origin. This is how we came to be, and this is essentially who I am. But you're inconsistent because you don't live like you're just stardust. Again, and you brought this up, Jacob. The idea of how can you blame somebody for the way atheists would see our brain is this is just a meat machine. It just reacts. It just has chemical reactions. It just does stuff, right? So when a leaf falls from a tree and it just falls to the ground, you're not going to be mad or blame the leaf for falling down. It happens, right? And so when a human being says, I just want to kill people, and then they go and they do it, why should you be mad at them for doing that?
Their brain. It's just their brain doing what their brain does.
Yeah, and this goes to the idea of what are we? Of course, it goes back to morality, but even deeper than that is what are we? Are we image of God? Are we created to worship and serve God, or are we just stuff happening?
I've always said the most powerful argument for God doesn't begin with questions about who he is, but with questions about who you are. When you actually reflect and you say, am I just a meat computer? Am I just a chemical reaction playing itself out? And in my mind, I can't think of anything more like, I could doubt a lot of things. I could doubt that this computer was actually in front of me right now and that I was actually dreaming. I couldn't even imagine the ability to say that I am just a meat computer, because it essentially removes me, the I, the self, the thing that chooses, from the equation entirely. And so to me, it's just a self-evidently false thing that is like, that's like the starting point. Like, if anything's true, that's true. Like, I exist, the self, the me, the thing that chooses. And go ahead, Hayden.
I was gonna say, I think that's a great example. And tell me what you think about this. Maybe this isn't, my thought was, and maybe they would just say we're more intelligent or something, but do you think an animal has ever thought, like, why am I here? Or like, what's the purpose of life? Like, I don't believe animals think about that. Right.
The nature of animals ontologically, and do they have free will and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a good question. And I think it's honestly one that we could do a whole giant episode about. My quick answer is that I think that animals live on a lower level of they are less agents than we are agents.
Right.
They are more pre-programmed than we are.
But my point is, an atheist would say we're equivalent. We're all stardust. But animals don't think about these type of things we're talking about, right? Never in a million years could an animals do this.
So here's, right now, right? Let me throw this one down. So this is one that I thought about, and I've realized it's one that people ignore. Have there ever been animals sort of similar to house cats in the great history of the eons of our planet? Yes. Saber-toothed cats and other things like that. Have there been creatures out there, sort of like giraffes, somewhat comparable? Yes. Has there ever been a creature that flew to the moon? Has there ever been a creature that created the Sistine Chapel? Has there ever been anything even remotely like human beings? Like even close? Because I'll tell you what, they'll say we're animals. We're the weirdest freaking animals ever. Because there's been a lot of animals, and guess what most animals did? They did animal stuff. They pooped and they ate and they lived and they walked around and then they died and then they had some babies or whatever, not in that order. But that's all they did, right? Mm-hmm. They did animal stuff.
That's my point. We
are the most, and what's really crazy is this: even human history, if you go back far enough, human beings kind of were like doing animal stuff. It's literally only in the past 4,000 or 5,000 years that all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, we went from basically behaving like animals to flying to the moon. And I'm like, and even the in the blink of the bajillions of years, it's like, I use this analogy. Imagine you have babies and you teach a preschool, and the babies you teach it for 100 years of classes of babies. And guess what? The babies come in, they act like babies, they poop, they cry, they do the little baby thing. And then all of a sudden you have a group in there. It's year 100, your 100th year of teaching. And all of a sudden in the last minutes of class, the children get together, build a rocket ship, and they fly to the moon. It's like, you'd go, those are, what happened to those babies? Those are weird babies. Like, how did that, but then you got people that are being, no, they're just babies. They're just babies, human beings. We're just animals. We're just animals like all the rest.
Let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying that an atheist would say the Earth is 65 billion years old, or however many billions a year. Humans have been around for billions of years, or some, what are they called?
Long periods of time. But they here's what the atheist would say. The atheist would look at you and say, you're just an animal. And I'd look at them and say, I am the weirdest freaking animal that has ever existed.
Right. Because of the exponential growth. If what they're saying is true, the exponential growth is unexplainable. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not even like, why do we behave the way that we do? And that's where I believe that when we talk about, well, maybe it wasn't that long ago in history that something happened that created some different class of being in the universe.
Not just meat computers. That's how we got here.
Not only not meat computers, but like not only not meat computers, but like not even animals. Like we're in a class unto ourselves. We're human beings. And there's never been a creature in the history of the planet, even according to the atheists, that's ever been like a human being. And that means you're unique. You're not just stardust. There's a crap ton of stardust.
I got to pause this here for a second because Daniel, and this is for a whole other conversation. You would say that we are creatures, right? The Bible uses the word we're not all God's children, you would say, but we're his creation or his creatures. But you would still agree that we're above the intelligence of the animals, right? You can't.
Oh, of course. I mean,
yeah.
We would go to Genesis, and in Genesis, when God creates, he creates everything else. Then he creates man at the end, and he says man's made in his image. There's a distinction between mankind and everything else. And then, of course, he gives mankind the prerogative to go take dominion, be fruitful, be multiply, and essentially spread God's image all over the earth. And so we recognize there's a vast difference between us and dogs, us and animals. We just say we can account for it because of the biblical God.
Yeah. Right. All right. So real quick, just to kind of wrap this up, the last one here is, what are the consequences? And I've thought of this as basically like, what actually emerges from this stuff? You know what I mean? What are the actual, what are the facts here? It's sort of I like to use the analogy of communism. You know what I mean? It's like, there's a lot of great, wonderful theories, but like, what actually happens?
The fruits, what are the fruits? Is this what you're asking?
That's exactly what it is. And the scriptures talk about the fruits. Like, does this actually work or not? One of my favorite people in the world is Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell, it's funny, he actually was a Marxist at one time. He's a famous economist. He's extremely brilliant. And his whole thing is, well, what are the facts? When we look at the war on poverty, like, did the war on poverty actually work? Like, what emerged from it? Did it produce the effect that you thought? And so, again, when anytime someone makes an argument, right, for something, it's if we can look at the past and actually see what the consequences are of that idea, well, then we can make a judgment call about that. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on this sort of line of thinking?
Yeah, well, it wasn't atheism that got rid of slavery. It was Christian men who said that it's wrong to treat black people this way, right? And anywhere Christianity has gone, it stopped out chattel slavery. Christians are the ones who built hospitals. Christians are the ones who built all these big universities.
So can I make one quick comment on that? Because I can hear all the atheists going, but the Bible says it justifies slavery and all this stuff. So here's my thing. And regardless, because we may have different biblical interpretations. The thing is the world historically has been awful. And we have slogged ourselves out of the chaos of a bad world, largely on the back of the Christian message, especially here in the West, and those truths that the Christian message teaches. And but that has been it's sort of like slavery is not unique in the world. Okay. It's the universal. What's unique is actually a group of people for some reason deciding en masse that not only everyone always didn't want themselves to be enslaved, but they didn't want other people to be enslaved either. And throughout the whole of human history, that was the norm. And Daniel, you're exactly right. It was the influence of Christianity specifically that actually was the driving force, as a matter of historical fact, that was the force that drove the universal end to slavery.
Yeah.
So
I think, I can say I know it's going to be the same for when it happens with abortion. I don't know how soon that'll happen, but one day I believe Christians will look back and say, well, that was great evil that happened, but it's not going to be atheists that stop that. It's going to have to be the Christians.
and it was human rights. The great book, Human Rights, all came from Christian ideology being spread throughout the world, right? That was kind of the universal notions that we have in the West of human rights. Those came about during the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was heavily influenced by the release of the New Testament and the rest of the scriptures in mass to society, where people started actually reading the Bible. And thank you, Protestants. Good work on that. And largely due to the Protestant Reformation and people actually reading the Bible, it changed the moral sort of milieu that people had. And they began to develop these ideas of that it's wrong, that people have rights, that sovereigns don't rule just absolutely. And all of these notions came out of the Christian movement. So again, but then if you go to the atheist movements in the world, which really there haven't ever been big ones except for in communist countries, and what have they all ended up in?
Yeah.
Genocide.
Yeah.
One comment, when you say human rights, the foremost group, and I'm not going to get political here, but those who espouse you say abortion, right? You talk about abortion. People are now saying abortion is a human right, or abortion is our woman's rights, right? And who are the individuals who are saying that? It's the atheists who are saying, I have a human right, stealing from the Christian worldview, but then applying it to murder.
You're getting it.
So
you're getting it. That's it. What's their presupposition? Right. They're presupposing the existence of human rights.
That are human rights in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this apologetic is so powerful. So I'm going to kind of circle back here and we'll wrap this up. But going back to Bahnsen's, 4 questions, this is how we get the gun out of their hand. And I'm telling you, once you understand this, once you start to evaluate the claims that are being made by people, it's what does their argument presuppose? Is this arbitrary? Is it inconsistent some way logically? And what are the consequences of it? All of a sudden you'll realize that people don't have crap. They're standing on no foundation, and yet they're arbitrarily going out and making these arguments. And I'll turn the time over to you, Daniel, to kind of give us some of the final word. What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the next segment, but part of it is this showing them their folly, right? But what any unbeliever is going to do is they're going to point it back at you. Now you account for this. You show me this. One of the questions we hear often is, okay, if I grant what you're saying, why your God, right? And so it's one thing to disarm somebody. It's another thing to actually show them that you have solid ground. And so while we're showing them from our perspective, what you're standing on is sinking sand. You don't have solid ground. This is where the Orthodox Christian worldview comes in and says, this is the only solid ground that a person could have to actually account for all these different things, for the preconditions of intelligibility, for morality, for laws of logic,
for creation,
order
of the universe,
even knowing that you exist, right? Because you run into some atheists and they'll say, I could be in the Matrix, I could be a brain in a vat. And so you want to account for your own existence. We would say you need the scriptures for that. And so to account
we'll get into that in the next one, because I think that I think a good way to frame this is that in this episode we've talked about how to disarm the atheists, to show that basically all they're saying is arbitrary and mere opinion and whim, which some of them actually admit. But then the question becomes, well, is it all arbitrary? Is there solid ground to stand on? And if so, what? And so I think we'll take that into the next segment. But thank everyone for joining us for this episode, and we'll catch you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you want more content, including the podcast, go to thoughtful-faith.com. Thanks for watching.